My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 82 years old, and I've lived a long life filled with quiet storms and loud betrayals. But none stung more than the night my own parents threw me and my grandchildren out into the cold rain, because I dared to give shelter to a hungry, barefoot milkboy who knocked on our back door asking for bread. We were soaked to the skin. My arthritis flared so badly I couldn't feel my legs, but I clutched my youngest grandson, David, as thunder rattled the sky like a warning. Beside me, my eldest, Rachel, held her little sister, Emma, under a thin wool blanket that smelled of mildew and desperation. Our bags were tossed out like trash. The door slammed behind us without a single flicker of regret. I'll never forget my father's last words before he shut us out. "You picked a stray over your family. Now go live like one." And yet, just 3 days later, a long black SUV rolled down our muddy street and stopped directly in front of our shed, the shed we'd been sleeping in. Out stepped the same boy, only he wasn't a boy anymore. He wore a fitted coat, leather shoes, and a look in his eyes that made my knees buckle. "My name is Daniel," he said. "You saved me when no one else would. Now let me return the favor." But how did we get from that muddy shed to a millionaire standing in front of us with keys to a mansion? Let me take you back. I wasn't always a burden to my family. I was the eldest of 5 children born to Ruth and Gerald Winston in the small town of Ashbrook, Kentucky. We grew up in a modest brick house on 5th Street. My father worked at the post office, and my mother ran the church choir. We weren't wealthy, but we lived decently, and my parents ruled with discipline cloaked as religion. No one questioned them. Not then. 17, I made my first mistake. I fell in love with a man named Frank Connolly. Kind, artistic, and unfortunately poor. My parents hated him. I was warned to stay away or be disowned. Chose Frank. He chose me back. We got married under a maple tree with 3 friends as witnesses. My parents didn't come. The next decade was a whirlwind of dreams and survival. Frank and I had 3 children. We struggled, yes, but we were happy. Frank was a carpenter. I cleaned houses and babysat to help make ends meet. Then, just after our youngest turned 5, Frank was killed in a roadside accident. A drunk driver. No insurance. No justice. I was 32, widowed, broke, and alone, with 3 hungry mouths and nowhere to go. When I showed up at my parents' doorstep holding Rachel's hand, they took us in. Or so I thought. They gave us the attic. No heat. 1 bed. I swallowed my pride. For the next 20 years I cleaned that house, took care of their garden, drove them to appointments, while raising my kids in silence. They never let me forget I was living on borrowed grace. But this story didn't start with Frank's death, or the attic, or even the cold rain. It began on a quiet Tuesday morning last fall. It was 6:30 a.m. I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen when I heard it. A soft knock at the back door. I thought it was the wind at first. Then came another knock. Gentle. Hesitant. I opened the door and saw him. Barefoot, shirt clinging to his ribs, face pale with hunger. A boy no older than 16. His lips trembled when he spoke. "Ma'am. I didn't steal nothing. I'm hungry. I used to deliver milk here last year. Please, just some bread. I haven't eaten in 2 days." His name was Daniel. I don't know what came over me, but I saw Frank's eyes in that boy. I brought him in. Sat him at the table. Gave him leftover stew and cornbread. As he ate, he cried. I knew better than to let my parents catch him there. But kindness isn't a thing you schedule. It either lives in you or it doesn't. By the time my mother walked in, Daniel had already drifted into sleep on the couch. She screamed like I'd invited the devil himself. "What is this? Who is that? You brought a street boy into this house. He could be a thief, a drug addict." "He's just hungry," I whispered. "Just a child." My father stomped in behind her, belt in hand. I stood between him and Daniel. That's when everything fell apart. They demanded I throw him out. I refused. They said if I wanted to keep him safe, I could go with him. So I packed what little we had, gathered my grandchildren, Rachel now 28, a single mom to two of her own, and we walked out into the rain. Daniel woke up halfway down the street and chased after us. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said. "Please don't let them hate you because of me." But it was too late. We'd already been disowned. That night we found shelter in an abandoned tool shed behind the town's old coal factory. Damp floor. Rusted nails. But we were together. What I didn't know was that Daniel wasn't who he seemed. He had run away, but not from poverty. He'd left a mansion. Left a driver. Left his father, a CEO of a billion-dollar dairy brand, because he'd rather beg for bread than live without love. That secret was about to change everything. And just when I thought our lowest moment had arrived, a neighbor spotted us in the shed and called the authorities. Not to help, but to accuse us of squatting. What happened next nearly broke me completely. The knock on the shed door came like thunder. I was huddled with Rachel and the kids, trying to keep them warm with torn jackets and the few blankets we had managed to salvage. The rain had turned the floor beneath us to soft mud. We hadn't eaten since the morning stew Daniel finished off, and I could feel my stomach eating itself from the inside. But I was more worried about the children. David had a cough. Emma wouldn't stop shivering. So when that knock came, I prayed it was help. It wasn't. It was Officer Clay, the same man who used to hand out Christmas candy in the town square. He looked at us like we were bugs on his boot. "We got a call," he said flatly, shining his flashlight around the shed. "Someone reported vagrants trespassing on private property." "That's you." I stepped forward, my back aching. "We're not vagrants, sir. This is temporary. Just for the night." "You got ID?" he asked. "I do," I replied, reaching into my pocket and handing him my worn-out wallet. He looked it over and scoffed. "Margaret Hale. Born and raised in Ashbrook, huh? I thought you were smarter than this." Rachel spoke up. "Please, officer, we're not criminals. We just need a place to stay until we figure something out." "Not my problem," he muttered. "Town's got shelters. You'll need to leave this property tonight, or I'll have no choice but to take you all in." Emma started crying. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. That's when Daniel stood up behind me. "I'll take responsibility," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They're here because of me. If there's a fine, I'll pay it." Officer Clay raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "I'm Daniel Roth," he said. "My father is Charles Roth. I'm not a runaway. I left on my own. Call him if you want." The air changed. Officer Clay stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Charles Roth," he repeated. "The Milk Empire guy." "Yes, sir." He stepped outside to make a call. For 10 minutes we sat in silence, hearts pounding like war drums. Then Officer Clay came back in and said the last thing I expected. "You're free to stay. For now. Mr. Roth is sending a car." Daniel looked at me and smiled gently. "You were kind when you had nothing, Mrs. Hale. You fed me when I was invisible. Now I want to feed you." But I wasn't ready to accept help. "Daniel," I said softly, "we didn't do it for a reward. We helped you because it was right." "I know," he said. "That's why it means everything to me." An hour later, a sleek black Cadillac rolled into the alley. The driver was dressed in a suit. His name was Thomas, and he bowed when he saw Daniel. "I've been looking for you for weeks," Thomas said, relieved. "Your father's been worried sick." Daniel didn't respond to that. He turned to me. "Will you come with me?" "I have children," I said. "And grandchildren." "Bring them." "Where are we going?" He smiled. "Home." We didn't speak much during the drive. The car smelled like fresh leather and new beginnings. My grandchildren stared wide-eyed at the interior, screens in the headrests, buttons that made the seats warm. Rachel looked nervous. I held her hand. An hour outside of Ashbrook, we turned off the main road and onto a long private drive lined with pine trees. At the end was a mansion that looked like it came out of a magazine. 3 stories. Balconies. Glass walls. A marble fountain. I stepped out slowly, feeling like I was dreaming. Daniel turned to me. "This is where I live." And now it's where you live too. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with emotion. Inside, a woman in a gray dress met us at the door. She was the housekeeper, Miss Carla. She had tears in her eyes when she saw Daniel. "Thank God you're safe," she whispered, hugging him. "Your father, he'll be here soon." We were shown to guest rooms that looked like five-star hotel suites. The children squealed over the big beds and soft carpets. Rachel sank into a velvet armchair like her bones finally remembered comfort. I stood in the hallway, overwhelmed. Daniel came over. "I meant what I said, Mrs. Hale. I want you to stay here. As long as you want." "Why us?" "Yes. Why not just go home on your own?" He looked down, then met my eyes. "Because you were the only person who didn't look at me like trash. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't expect anything from me. You just gave. I don't get that often." That night, I lay in bed in a room bigger than our entire attic back home. I should have felt safe. But I couldn't sleep. Because I knew what was coming. My parents wouldn't let this go quietly. And I was right. The very next morning they showed up. They didn't come to apologize. They didn't come to ask if we were okay. They came to threaten. I was in the garden, watching Emma feed the koi fish in the pond, when my mother's voice slithered through the air. "Margaret!" Turned slowly. There she stood, my mother. Her gray hair pulled tight, her mouth sharp as ever. Beside her was my father, arms folded like a judge ready to sentence me again. "You made a fool of us," she snapped. "Parading around with that boy, taking handouts." "This isn't a handout," I replied. "It's gratitude. Something you taught me nothing about. You come back home. You're embarrassing the family." I almost laughed. "Embarrassing? You threw your daughter and her grandchildren into a storm. And now you care about appearances. You were never grateful," my father growled. "You always thought you were better than us." "No," I said. "I just never learned to be cruel like you." "You're coming home," my mother ordered. "Or we'll make sure you regret ever leaving." Then came a voice that froze us all. "Is that a threat?" It was Charles Roth, Daniel's father. Regal. Power radiated from him like heat off a summer road. My parents turned to him, not recognizing him at first. Charles stepped forward, his gaze cutting through them. "I heard everything. And for the record, you're not welcome here again. You threw your family out like garbage. That tells me all I need to know about you." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand. "If you step foot on this property again, I'll have you escorted out. By force, if necessary." My parents stared at me, mouths trembling, then turned and walked away, humiliated but not yet defeated. But they didn't give up. That evening a call came from the local paper. Reporter. "We heard an elderly woman and her grandchildren were caught squatting on public property. Then whisked away by a millionaire's son. Want to comment?" My blood ran cold. My parents had gone to the media. I hadn't even begun to process our new life. And now they were trying to ruin it. Daniel took the phone from me and calmly said, "If you print anything about this family without permission, we will sue for defamation. Goodbye." But I knew this wasn't over. My parents weren't after headlines. They were after something much more dangerous. Because when bitter people lose control, they start reaching for anything they can burn. And the next thing they tried to take was Rachel's kids. It was the quiet after the storm that scared me most. For a few precious days we found peace. The children played in the courtyard with wooden blocks Daniel had bought them. Rachel started sleeping full nights again. Even I began to let my shoulders relax, little by little, as I prepared meals with Miss Carla and trimmed rose bushes along the garden paths. But it didn't last. On a rainy Thursday morning, while Rachel was giving Emma a bath upstairs, two women in stiff gray suits rang the front doorbell. I opened the door cautiously. "Mrs. Margaret Hale?" the older one asked, flashing a badge. "We're from Child Protective Services." My heart dropped into my stomach. "We received an anonymous tip that your grandchildren are living in an unfit and unstable environment. We need to ask some questions. Anonymous tip. There was no mystery. I knew who had called. My parents. Rachel came rushing downstairs in a panic, towel still clutched to her chest. The children peeked from the hallway, their innocent faces pale with confusion. Unstable? Rachel asked, her voice cracking. You think this place is unstable? We're here to make sure the children are safe, the younger woman said calmly. This isn't about judgment. It's about protection. Protection from what? Snap. From warmth. From food. From a bed that doesn't smell like mildew. We were homeless a week ago because her own grandparents threw her out. They ignored my outburst and asked to inspect the rooms. I watched them poke around the children's beds, open drawers, inspect closets, as if any trace of truth could be found in linen folds and shoe racks. After a half hour, they returned to the living room and looked at Rachel. We'll need to do a follow-up, the older woman said. But for now things look fine. We do recommend that if there's any dispute with biological family members, it be documented. Especially if they try to seek custody. Rachel burst into tears. Custody? Are you saying they could? It's unlikely, the woman said gently. But they do have a legal right to petition. Especially if they claim to be next of kin. Next of kin. It was a technicality. But my parents had always loved loopholes more than they loved people. When the door finally closed behind them, I turned to Daniel. We have to stop this, I said. Before they twist everything into something ugly. Daniel nodded, jaw tense. Then we'll do it legally. Publicly if we have to. But they're not taking anyone from this house. I swear it. Charles Roth returned later that evening, and when Daniel told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. We'll get a lawyer, Charles said. Not just any lawyer, an entire team. They won't lay a finger on this family again. I should have felt relieved. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents weren't done. Because people like them, they don't just lash out once. They build storms. Quietly. Carefully. The next blow came not to me, but to Rachel. She got a call while we were baking banana bread in the kitchen. Her face went white as she held the phone to her ear, her mouth slightly open. When she hung up, she said, I just lost my job. What? Why? Asked. She swallowed hard. They said my background check came back flagged. That I lied on my application about being evicted. Evicted? Gasped. You weren't evicted. We were thrown out. I know, Mama, she whispered. But they put it in the system as a legal eviction. My parents reported it. Said I was disorderly and unsafe to house. It's in the county records now. I sat down. My legs couldn't carry the weight of the betrayal. They want to break us, I said. Piece by piece. That night, I went into the backyard alone and stared up at the stars. I remembered being 16, looking at those same stars from my bedroom window, wondering what love meant, wondering if it ever meant safety. Back then, I thought it came from family. Now I knew better. It came from those who chose you when they didn't have to. And Daniel had chosen us. The next morning, he announced something I didn't expect. I'm going public, he said. I'm telling the press what happened. Not to shame your parents, but to show the world what real kindness looks like. Rachel and I were terrified. You'll be dragged through the mud, I warned. They'll say you're doing it for attention. Let them, Daniel replied. I want to show them that the people the world tries to silence, the elderly, the poor, the tired mothers, are the very people who save lives. 2 days later, a feature article was published on a major national website. The headline read, Runaway heir saved by struggling grandmother. Now he's returning the favor. It went viral. Suddenly reporters were calling. Bloggers. Podcasts. People from around the world sent messages. Some shared their own stories of being disowned. Others offered donations. Some just said thank you. But with the fame came fire. My parents were furious. They held a press conference in front of their local church, claiming we were manipulating a poor young boy for wealth. They called me unstable and vindictive. They said I'd corrupted my daughter and endangered my grandchildren. It would have destroyed me. But something unexpected happened. The community turned on them. Old neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now stood up for us. I remember Margaret walking to 3 jobs when her husband died, one woman said on live TV. Her parents never lifted a finger. Even Officer Clay, who had once threatened to arrest us, sent a handwritten apology and delivered toys for the children. But the most powerful voice came from Charles Roth himself. He appeared on national television with Daniel by his side and said, "This woman didn't know who my son was. She gave him warmth and food when the world turned him away. She gave him hope. That is the kind of character money can't buy. And I will stand behind her and her family for life." That should have been the end of it. But evil doesn't just fade. It festers. And my parents, they were planning something darker. Something I didn't see coming. The day before Rachel's court hearing for full custody confirmation, my mother filed a criminal report. She accused me, Margaret Hale, of harboring a runaway minor under false identity and endangering children. My name was now part of an active investigation. I stood in my room, holding the official letter, my hands trembling. Rachel walked in, saw my face and froze. "What is it, Mama?" I couldn't speak. I handed her the letter. She read it. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, whispering, "They're going to destroy you. Even if they can't win, they'll make you bleed." I knelt beside her. And I made a decision. "I've been silent my whole life," I whispered. "Obedient, gentle, helper. But this ends now. If they want war." I stood up slowly, every bone in my body aching. "Then they'll get war. 'Cause I was done hiding. Had a voice. And they were about to hear it." The morning of the hearing, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 82 years old. Wrinkles deepened not just by time, but by years of silencing myself for the comfort of others. For the sake of peace. For family. But peace had never come. And now my very existence was on trial. Rachel and I walked into the courthouse in borrowed heels and pressed clothes, Daniel beside us like a silent shield. His father had sent his personal legal team, and they flanked us like knights, sharp and calm. But my heart was anything but calm, because I knew what was at stake. My daughter's rights, my grandchildren's safety, my own dignity, and behind all of it, my parents. They sat across the courtroom, stiff and righteous, as though this was just another Sunday service and they were about to sing the loudest hymn. When the judge called the hearing to order, the room fell into a hush. We started with the custody case. Rachel's attorney spoke first, laying out the facts. How she had raised her kids alone for years, how her only eviction was a malicious act of family cruelty, how we had found stability only after being taken in by someone who owed us nothing. Then my mother's lawyer stood. He painted a picture of dysfunction, a bitter widow, an emotionally volatile daughter, a house full of unlawful influence. My mother sat there nodding like a queen, hands folded in false concern. I clenched my fists, but the judge didn't buy it. She asked to speak privately with the children. When they came out from her chambers, she looked directly at my parents and said, "This court finds no reason to strip Rachel Hale of custody. In fact, this court is concerned about the malicious interference by outside parties claiming to be next of kin." Rachel sobbed into my shoulder. But the celebration was brief, because then came the second hearing. The charges against me. My parents had filed an affidavit accusing me of endangering Daniel, claiming I knew who he was and manipulated him for wealth and shelter. They even submitted a photograph from the newspaper article as proof of intent. It was absurd, but it was enough to open a file. I took the stand with my heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear my own name. The prosecutor, a wiry man with sharp eyes, tried to trap me. "You claim you didn't know Daniel Roth's identity, yet you allowed him into your home without question?" "He wasn't a stranger," I said. "He was a starving child. You didn't ask his name, where he came from. I asked if he was hungry." A murmur went through the courtroom. And when did you find out he was Charles Roth's son? Not until the police came to remove us from the shed. Yet you allowed him to live with your grandchildren after that? He had no home. He asked to stay. And he never once harmed anyone. In fact, he protected us. Protected you how? I looked over at Daniel. He gave us dignity. Something we hadn't felt in years. The prosecutor frowned, flipping through his notes. Then Daniel stood up. I'd like to testify, he said. The judge nodded. He walked to the witness box like he was born there. My name is Daniel Roth, he began. I left home because I couldn't bear the weight of being seen only as my father's fortune. I wanted to know what it meant to live without privilege. I knocked on over a dozen doors. Only one opened. He turned to me. Hers. I felt tears building, but I swallowed them. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't ask what I had. She gave me a bowl of stew, a crust of bread, and the warmth of her broken fireplace. He paused. I was nobody when she met me. That's why it mattered. And since then? The prosecutor asked. What role has she played in your life? Daniel smiled gently. She gave me a reason to go home, to fix things with my father. And in return, I gave her what little I had to offer, a home that was always meant to have love inside it. The courtroom was still. Even the prosecutor had no rebuttal. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Mrs. Hale, this court sees no criminal activity in what you did. In fact, what you did was profoundly human. You reminded this young man what decency looks like. The charges are dismissed. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. But this time I didn't hide behind anyone. I stood on those steps and faced the cameras. I was raised to believe that family meant everything, I said. But I've learned that sometimes, the family you're born into doesn't hold a candle to the family you choose. A reporter asked, What do you want now, Mrs. Hale? I looked around, at Rachel, at my grandchildren, at Daniel. I want peace. Not just for us, but for everyone who's been discarded for choosing kindness over tradition. For a few weeks, it seemed like we had found that peace. Rachel was offered a new job at a law firm, thanks to a viral letter of recommendation written by Daniel himself. The children were enrolled in a private school where they finally felt safe. And I started teaching gardening classes to elderly women in the community. It was quiet until the letter came. From a lawyer, representing my parents. They were suing me for public defamation and emotional damages. They claimed the viral story cost them their positions in church leadership, their social standing, and their dignity. They demanded financial compensation. $500,000. I stared at the letter for hours. Daniel offered to pay it off immediately, but I stopped him. No, I said. If I let them get away with this, I'll never stop paying. He nodded. Then we'll fight. Properly. And we did. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about truth. And on the day of the civil trial, I decided to tell the story I had never told before. Not to the judge, not to Rachel, not even to myself. I took the stand, voice trembling. My parents taught me that silence was holy, that women should obey, that love was measured by how much suffering you could endure. Paused, my voice cracking. They taught me to smile through betrayal, to kneel when I was bruised, to call it honor when it was just survival. A few people in the courtroom wiped their eyes. But the day they threw me and my grandchildren into the rain for feeding a stranger, that's when I learned the truth. I looked directly at my mother. That silence is not a virtue when it protects cruelty. That obedience is not noble when it crushes the soul. And that love, real love, does not exile you for choosing compassion. I sat down to a silence heavier than thunder. The court ruled in our favor. They dismissed the defamation claim and ordered my parents to pay our legal fees. When the judge banged the gavel, I felt something break. Not a heart chain. But even then, my parents had one last card to play. Something they had hidden for decades. A secret they thought would ruin me. And they mailed it to my door. without a return address. When I opened that envelope and saw the old yellowed paper inside, gasped, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth of where I came from. And it was something I never saw coming. The envelope was thin, but it carried the weight of generations. I held it between trembling fingers, unable to breathe. Rachel stood behind me, arms crossed, watching my face for any sign of what lay inside. "What is it, Mama?" she whispered. I peeled the flap open slowly. Inside was a folded document. Aged, the paper brittle, the ink faded. At the top, in bold typewritten letters, it read, "Adoption certificate." I blinked hard. It wasn't Rachel's. It wasn't any of the grandkids. It was mine. I read the name on the form again and again, each time hoping it would change. Margaret Lynn Hale, adopted by Ruth and Gerald Winston. Date: October 3, 1947. Location: Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My knees buckled, and I dropped into the nearest chair. Rachel rushed forward. "Mama, what is that?" I handed it to her in silence. Her eyes widened. You were adopted." I couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know either. Everything I had believed about my life, my lineage, my worth in their eyes, my guilt, my punishment, it all shifted in a heartbeat. I wasn't their daughter. I was their burden, their transaction. That's why they never loved me the way they loved my siblings. That's why no matter how hard I tried, I was always the outsider, the servant, the scapegoat. 'Cause I was. My mind swam with memories. Birthdays they forgot. My first period where I sat alone in the bathroom for hours because my mother refused to talk to me about it. My graduation day when they showed up an hour late and left before my name was called. It all made sense now. They hadn't thrown their daughter out into the rain. They had thrown out a stranger they never wanted. Daniel walked in, took one look at us, and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice careful. Rachel handed him the paper. He read it, then looked at me. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "Now we know." And somehow that meant everything. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined their cruelty. It had roots deeper than I knew. But what hurt most was that they'd held this secret for 82 years, and only revealed it now, as a weapon, to make me question everything, to unravel the little strength I'd clawed back. And it almost worked. That night, I sat in the garden alone, staring at the koi pond. Miss Carla brought me tea, but I barely touched it. Daniel came out after dark, quietly sitting beside me. After a long silence, I asked, "Do you think I'm still me? If I wasn't born to the people I thought I was?" He looked at me softly. "You're more you than anyone I've ever met. Blood didn't raise me when I was on the street. Kindness did. And you've got more of that in your pinky than most families carry in their whole name." I let the tears come. "I feel unanchored," I whispered. "Like I never belonged anywhere." "You belong here," he said firmly. "With us." I turned to him. "Do you think they loved me even a little?" "No," he said gently. "But they feared you. 'Cause you loved anyway. That's power, Margaret." The next morning, Rachel found an old photo album buried in a chest at the back of the hallway closet. Taped to the inside was a note written in shaky cursive. It read, "You weren't born from us, but you were better than any of us. Forgive us if you can. Ruth." It shattered me. Even as she hated me, she must have known the truth, that I had outgrown the pain. I decided then, I would no longer be bound by them, by what they gave or didn't give, by their words, their cruelty, their silence. I would choose my own name, my own family, my own ending. With Daniel and Charles's help, we filed for a legal injunction, one that barred my parents from contacting us again. We also started the process to seal the adoption file permanently. But something kept tugging at my heart. If I was adopted, then who were my real parents? Was I abandoned, sold, lost? Or was there someone out there who had wanted me? Daniel noticed my restlessness and offered what I didn't know I needed. "Let's find them," he said. "Whoever they were." Took 2 weeks of phone calls, DNA testing, and combing through state archives. I didn't expect anything. But then it came. A woman named Annabelle Smith had submitted her DNA to an ancestry site 5 years ago. She was 89. And she was looking for the daughter she gave up in 1947. A girl born to her at a hospital in Baton Rouge. Margaret. I stared at the screen as if it would explode. She's alive. Gasp. Rachel cried softly beside me. Daniel smiled. She's waiting to meet you. We drove to Alabama that weekend. Me, Rachel, the kids, and Daniel. It was a quiet ride, thick with emotion and expectation. When we pulled up to the small white house on the edge of a field, I felt the world spin. A frail woman in a lavender cardigan stood at the porch, hands trembling over a cane. She looked like me. The way my smile curved, the tilt of my chin, even the silver waves of her hair. She whispered, "My baby." I walked toward her on legs that barely held me. We didn't speak at first. We just hugged. A hug I had waited my whole life to feel. Inside, she explained everything. She was 17. Her parents forced her to give me up or risk being disowned. She cried for days. She had tried to find me once I turned 18, but the adoption was sealed and lost in a fire. She'd spent the rest of her life wondering where I was. "I thought maybe you hated me," she said. I shook my head through tears. "You didn't throw me away. You gave me life. They were the ones who couldn't see it." She kissed my forehead. "I see it now." We spent 3 days with her. 3 days that felt like spring after a long winter. When we left, she gave me a locket with her baby photo inside and said, "Now you'll always know where you came from." On the ride home, I looked out the window at the setting sun. For the first time in 82 years. Felt whole. But just as I began to write my final chapter, life had one more twist to give. Because the next morning, we woke up to find Daniel's father, Charles, sitting in the living room, ashen-faced. He held up his phone and said quietly, "There's been an accident." And what he told us next would change everything all over again. Charles's voice was strained, like it was holding back a storm. "There's been an accident," he repeated, lowering his phone onto the coffee table. "It's your grandparents." My blood froze. Rachel sat up from the armrest she was perched on. "What kind of accident?" Charles looked at us all, one by one, as if searching for the right way to say it. But there's never a right way to say some things. "There was a fire," he finally said. "Late last night. Their house burned down completely. The fire marshal says it started in the kitchen. Electrical. Ruth was inside. She didn't make it." The room fell silent. Not because of grief, but because no one knew what to feel. I pressed a hand to my chest, where my heart was now beating erratically, not from sorrow but from shock. "And Gerald?" I asked quietly. Charles hesitated. "He survived. He's in the hospital. Smoke inhalation. Mild burns." Rachel stood up and paced across the room. I don't understand. Why does this feel confusing?" "'Cause it was. These were the people who tried to rip our family apart. Who threw us into the rain. Who accused me of crimes. Who tried to take my grandchildren. Who hid the truth about my adoption for 82 years. And weaponized it in their final years. And yet, they were still my past. Still the people I had once called home." Charles said gently, "Gerald has asked to see you, Margaret. He said he doesn't have much time." My hand shook. Rachel stepped forward. "You don't owe him anything, Mama." But I shook my head. "No. I have to go." Rachel looked hurt. "Why?" I looked at her with tears in my eyes. "Because if I don't, I'll carry the bitterness forever. And I've carried enough pain." That afternoon, Daniel drove me to the hospital. Gerald Winston lay in a sterile room, face pale against the oxygen mask. He looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Like a man stripped of his armor and arrogance. He turned his head when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then he removed the mask slowly and rasped, "You came." I sat beside him. His eyes welled with tears. I had never seen him cry, not once in my life. I was cruel, he whispered. From the day you arrived in that house. I didn't want another mouth to feed. I told Ruth it was a mistake. But she said it would make us look holy. Like good Christians. I stared at him. You never once treated me like a daughter. He nodded. I know. You were just a symbol. Badge of piety. But you were better than all of us. He coughed violently, then continued, voice barely audible. She loved you, you know, Ruth. In her own twisted way. She just couldn't show it. Couldn't admit it. She felt threatened by how good you were. How pure. I didn't speak. I didn't have the words. I see it now, he said. At the end of everything. What you really were. What we could have had. He reached for my hand. And I let him. Forgive me, he whispered. I thought about that girl I used to be. The one who begged for praise. Who cried alone at the attic window. Who scrubbed floors to earn love. She deserved an apology. But I didn't need it anymore. I already did, I said. Years ago. He smiled weakly. And just like that he closed his eyes. And didn't open them again. I walked out of that hospital lighter. Not because a man had died. But because something in me had been released. Daniel and I didn't speak much on the ride back. But when we got home, Rachel met me at the door with open arms. We cried. Not for the ones we lost. But for the ones we finally found. Weeks passed. We held a small memorial. Not for the public, not for spectacle, but for closure. Just us. Rachel. The kids. Daniel. Miss Carla. Me. I stood in front of the oak tree in our backyard, where the autumn leaves danced like fire and gold, and said a simple prayer. Thank you for the lessons. Now let them rest. Afterward, Rachel approached me with an envelope. I know this isn't the right time, she said. But I've been working on something. Inside the envelope was a deed. To a modest 2-story house in the heart of Ashbrook. A place I had passed 100 times but never thought much of. It was mine. My name. Signed and sealed. Rachel smiled. It's yours, Mama. Bought with my own money. No handouts. Just love. You deserve a place to call your own. I cried harder than I had at the funeral. 'Cause for the first time in my life, someone had chosen me. A month later, we opened a community shelter for displaced mothers and grandmothers. We called it the Milk House. In honor of Daniel. In honor of that cold morning when a knock changed everything. Women from across the state came to live, heal, and grow. And every Friday, I would stand in the kitchen and make stew from scratch. The same kind I gave Daniel that day. Because kindness, I'd learned, wasn't a gift you give once. It's a flame you pass on. But the story didn't quite end there. One morning, while organizing old files in my new home, I found a letter tucked into a Bible. Not my mother's. Not my birth mother's. It was a letter I had written to myself, 50 years ago. I opened it with shaking hands. Dear Margaret, it read. If you ever forget your worth, remember this. You are not what they say. You are not their shame. You are not their silence. You are light. You are thunder. You are your own beginning. Because I had forgotten. But now, I remembered. I hung that letter on my wall, right next to a photo of Rachel and the kids. And Daniel, the boy I saved, the man who saved us back. And beneath the frame, I wrote the words that carried me through the darkest rain. Love loudly, even if they throw you out for it. Because sometimes when the world shuts the door, the miracle is what comes knocking after.